one would have thought that when this industry was closed a few months ago, it was done with the premise that it would have put a hold on criminal gangs who were engaging in a serious amount of theft, as indicated by the Attorney General in terms of our telecommunication infrastructure and so on. But, Madam Speaker, 6 months later, there has been no indication that those who have engaged in those activities have been brought to justice. And while doing so in terms of the shutting of the industry, hundreds of families have been placed on the breadline. Madam Speaker, let me say this bill, and how it's laid out and presented, is possibly a victim of government's approach to the drafting of legislation and to governance generally in a very mismatched type of way. Madam Speaker, with only a few days left in this year, and the government not having accomplished much with respect to their legislative agenda, this ill-advised and, might I say, a bit sloppy version of the bill has been brought to this Parliament, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this bill is a bit half-baked and ill-considered. That the only explanation that the government is racing to deliver on its promise in presenting legislation in this calendar year of 2022. And, Madam Speaker, it is evidenced. The Attorney General came today with a number of amendments which he proposes for today. So clearly, the rush over the last couple of weeks or couple of months to get this legislation in place, only today the Attorney General has identified some key issues that he tends to bring amendments to, I guess, when we get to the committee stage, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this industry, as indicated by the Attorney General, is worth about $220 million each year. And my intention today, Madam Speaker, is to go through a bit of the clauses which were presented today, not in too much of detail by the Attorney General. And I may touch the surface of many of them, while my colleagues who would come after me may drill down on matters of labor, constitutionality, and some other areas of general law. But, Madam Speaker, the biggest thing for me is that this bill is really burdened with red tape in terms, and it doesn't match our entrenched culture as a society. And I will explain those things as I go on in my presentation today, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, you would recall that the government received several proposals from the scrap iron dealers and other stakeholders for the legitimate and efficient administration of the industry. Generally speaking, Madam Speaker, those measures from the players of the industry met best international practices. I can inform this House that through the Dealers Association, although they were engaged in several conversations with the cabinet-appointed body to look at this industry, my information, Madam Speaker, is very few, if any, of the recommendations as put out in the legislation today are hinged from some of that conversations that were made with the dealers, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, even worse, one would have thought that the government, in pioneering legislation to determine the future of an entire industry, would have had the good sense and decency to share the legislation with the stakeholders and allow time for digestion and feedback. Madam Speaker, I am informed that the Dealers Association may have only laid eyes on this bill, just like us last week Friday. So that, to me, Madam Speaker, would not have given the main stakeholders the time to digest what is being put forward before this Parliament today. Madam Speaker, this is how you rule with a bit of disrespect and a bit of lack of empathy, Madam Speaker.